Okay, we are going to go over the ultimate prophecy of the Bible. 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 28 is the ultimate prophecy of the Bible. You may think that the book of Revelation is the ultimate prophecy, but no. 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 28 is the ultimate prophecy. Let's get started. Yet now, verse 20, yet now Christ has been roused from among the dead, the firstfruit of those who are reposing. He's the firstfruit of those. The whole thing about this gospel of ours is all about life and death. And death is a big problem. Yet now Christ has been roused from among the dead, the firstfruit of those who are reposing. What does the word firstfruit mean? It's a farmer's term. It's a farmer's metaphor. The firstfruit indicates how the rest of the crop is going to turn out. For since in fact, verse 21, for since in fact through a man came death, through a man also comes the resurrection of the dead. Verse 22, for even as in Adam all are dying, nobody can argue with this, all are dying. How? They're in Adam. For even as in Adam all are dying, thus also in Christ shall all be vivified. There are many preachers around the country who will tell you that all in Christ shall be vivified, but it's just not true. Paul tells us that in Christ all shall be vivified, not all in Christ. In Christ all shall be vivified. Yet each in his own class. Don't rush this thing. Christ is the first fruit. Each in his own class. The first fruit is Christ of vivification. Thereupon those who are Christ in his presence. That's the second group. The third group of vivification is called the consummation. Thereafter, the consummation of this process. Thereafter, the consummation, whenever he may be giving up the kingdom to his God and Father, whenever he should be nullifying all sovereignty and all power and all authority. So he's going to be nullifying. King James says abolishing. He's going to be abolishing all sovereignty, authority, and power. This is a pretty heavy concept, and it gets even heavier. Verse 25, for he must be reigning until he should be placing his enemies under his feet. Christ does not reign forever and ever. In spite of what the King James says over in Revelation, where it says Christ will reign forever and ever, he reigns until he should be placing his enemies under his feet. The last enemy is being abolished, death. Now in this context, this is very wonderful stuff here. The last enemy being abolished is death. The other three enemies are sovereignty, authority, and power. Sovereignty, authority, and power. For he must be reigning until he should be placing all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be abolished is the thing that keeps us from God, and that is death. For he subjects all under his feet. Now whenever he may be saying that all is subject, it's evident that it's outside of him who subjects all to him. Now whenever all may be subjected to him, then the Son himself shall be subjected to him who subjects all to him, that God may be all in all. It doesn't say God will be all in some. It doesn't say God will be some in all. It says that God may be all in all. Okay? So, what we have here is the ultimate in prophecies, the final prophecy, that authority, sovereignty, and power will be abolished because it won't be needed anymore if the wages of sin, which is death, has been abolished and God becomes all in all. That's the ultimate prophecy, that God may be all in all. Nobody's left it behind. In Christ shall all be vivified. Okay, and just to prove to you that this is the ultimate prophecy, let's jump over to the book of Revelation, the final few chapters, chapter 20, 21, and 22, and show you how much his language is of rulership, authority, and power. So, verse 2, and he binds him 1,000 years. The word bind, that indicates authority, power. He seals it over him I perceived thrones, and they are seated on them, and judgment was granted to them. They also live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead do not live until the 1,000 years. The second death has no jurisdiction. They're still talking about jurisdiction, so there's still power going on here. Mobilizing them for battle. What is battle but power? Here's a verse that mentions a throne. Get over into verse 21. Loud voices out of the throne. A loud voice out of the throne. I'm not totally analyzing what's going on in this book of Revelation because John, who wrote the book of Revelation, was short-sighted. He did not see way into the future beyond the eons when God would make all alive beyond the reach of death. They shall be vivified in Christ. John didn't see that. He was short-sighted compared to what Paul saw. I'll scroll down here and look for a little more language about the kings of the earth. Verse 22. The throne of God, slaves, commissions his messenger to show his slaves. There's still a lot of power, authority, and what's the words? Authority, power, and sovereignty going on in the book of Revelation when it closes up. In fact, it's discouraging. It says, let the injurer injure still, let the filthy one be filthy still, let the one do righteousness still, let the just do righteousness still, let the holy be holy. There's still a great dichotomy going on when John closes his book of Revelation. Outside are curs and chanters and paramours and murderers and idolaters. You don't want to look at the book of Revelation as the final prophecy. It's not. It's a short-sighted thing. It's still within the bounds of the eons. And God, who makes the eons in Christ, promises through Paul that even as in Adam all are dying, thus also in Christ shall all be vivified beyond the reach of death. Christ is the firstfruit of those who are vivified. And it all happens when Christ gives up his reign. See, he must be reigning until when he's going to give up his rulership when all this stuff is accomplished, that God may be all in all. When John closes up his little book here, God is not all in all. He's more in some than he is in others. He's definitely not all in all. But in Paul's ultimate prophecy of 1 Corinthians 15, 20 through 28, you have a wonderful picture here of the final completion of God's Aeonian purpose. It's the ultimate prophecy. It goes beyond the book of Revelation. And you can't mix the two. Paul's prophecy was given to him to show that this thing is beautiful, what God has planned. God's purpose is beautiful, and it's going to come to fruition, all in good time, each in his own class, the firstfruit Christ, thereupon those who are Christ in his presence, thereafter the consummation. The consummation of what? The consummation of the vivification of all in Christ. Okay? So I hope you enjoy this. It's brief. Look at it for yourself. In fact, I would recommend that you memorize these 8 verses. Verse 20 through 28. Just memorize them. They're very beautiful verses. Yet now Christ has been roused from among the dead, the first fruit of those who are reposing. For since, in fact, through a man came death, through a man also comes the resurrection of the dead. This is good news. We know the bad news that through a man came death. Through a man also comes the resurrection of the dead. For even as in Adam all are dying, thus also in Christ shall all be vivified. Each in his own class, the first fruit Christ, thereupon those who are Christ in his presence, thereafter the consummation, whenever he may be giving up the kingdom to his God and Father, whenever he should be nullifying all sovereignty, authority, and power, For he must be reigning. Yes, yes, he must be reigning. He must be reigning until he places all of his enemies under his feet. And when God can get rid of sovereignty, authority, and power, that means there's no more animosity, there's no more angst between creation and the Creator. So, so nullifying those things is, of course, the consequence, you know? They're not needed when everybody comes home. He must be reigning until he places all of his enemies under his feet. And humans and bad humans and the devil and the fallen angels, they're not truly the enemies of God. The enemies of God, according to this context, are sovereignty, authority, power, and death. 4 entities. Sovereignty, authority, and power, and death are the first 3 mentioned. The last enemy to be abolished is the wages of sin itself. He's going to abolish the wages of sin, and that he may be all in all, that God may be all in all. Not all in some, not some in all, not a little more in some than he is in others. No, God is going to be all in all. Thanks for listening. Like and